Hey, this is John Lee Dumas, the founder and host of Entrepreneurs on Fire. And if you're wanting to learn how to embrace change and navigate through disruption as a leader, then listen to the Leadership is Changing podcast with my good friend, Denis Gianoutsos. He's prepared to ignite.
Welcome to Leadership is Changing. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change. This is taking your leadership to another level by finding the balance between executive excellence and personal well-being through stories that inspire real change. It's time to adapt in our fast-moving world when leadership is changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos.
You know, around leadership, I would tell you, I have had the privilege of being led and mentored by some great leaders, mostly unknowns. And then I was raised for several years by my mother and grandmother. Mm-hmm. And so I came up through, we were very poor, and it humbled you. And I say, some people, I say I had a choice. I was in quicksand and I had to leave myself out of it.
Right.
And obviously I had some help. So people have and still come from tougher times, but it was tough as a youngster. And I think it really taught me the value of many things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. And so it's amazing how a lot of our backgrounds in our lives and that, especially when we start younger as kids and that sort of start to shape us for the future, and those kind of experiences would have helped you. How did you get into leadership? What was the thing that sort of drove you into leadership?
That's funny. When I get asked that question, I always say the same thing. I felt like I came out of the womb and was forced to be a leader.
Forced to be a leader?
Yeah, because I'm one of six, and everybody was working to make a living to bring us up. And so I was on my own a lot. So I had to figure things out real early. And so true leadership, one started for me in high school, probably. I got involved. I was a class president. Wasn't really political, but the class president. So I had to lead my class for 4 years and do all of those things. And so it was not natural for me. I debate that with people all the time because some people say there's such thing as a natural born leader. I don't believe that. I think you can be born into it, just like you can get promoted into a leadership position. And then obviously in the corporate world, I got selected into what they call a advanced leadership program, because the banking world company I went to work with then really felt like they needed to develop more leaders and they needed to do it quick. It was a very accelerated leadership program.
Okay.
And it was interesting because when I talk about my book, Boss or Leader, I tell stories from those days because they made me circulate around the country and work with different leaders over a 2-year period. And so I really was able to separate a boss from a leader.
So were those days like you were a young graduate that came into the organization and they were wanting you to go around in a rotation throughout the organization to experience different leadership, to experience different parts of the business and so forth? And when you saw the difference between a boss and a leader, what was probably one of the biggest things that sort of stood out for you, the difference between a boss and a leader?
Values. Values, which is why I spend so much time on values-based leadership and values-based leadership coaching, because I found that to be the biggest difference. What do they value? And that answer doesn't always have to be just people, because I feel like I got to see one person who pretty much just valued money, and he was a boss. And the only reasons why people wanted to work for him was because if you worked for him, you made a lot of money too. But behind the scenes, obviously, I don't think people were using the term value, but they were saying a lot of things behind the scenes about him. So they didn't respect and like them.
Okay, so they got things across the line and helped the organization and help him make money, but in turn, they made money as well. So it probably goes a bit along the lines of Zig Ziglar, right? If you help enough people get what they want, you can get what you want. Right. However, what I'm saying is probably his approach, the way he did things, probably wasn't that good in the sense of respect or helping people move forward.
Yeah, he was tough. And he wasn't a relationship guy. Right. So it was all about work. It was all about money. And it wasn't even the awards for him. It was the money. So I saw that pretty quickly. And then as I continue the story, then I worked for a gentleman who handpicked me to come work with him at the organization. I don't know why, even to this day, and he's passed now, that mentored me like crazy on leadership. And he never used the word leadership that I can remember. but he just really poured into me. And his style was really neat and simple, but yet direct.
Mm.
And you felt even when he was correcting you, or even when I might have made a mistake and he needed to talk to me and have that talk with me, I still felt that he really cared about me. And it made a huge difference. And people really respected him. I'd never heard, and it was a large organization, I never heard anyone say a bad word about him. And his values were strong. And it was a big, I was so blessed to work with that man. Really.
Yeah, sounds wonderful, man. And the sense that he took you under his wing and he developed you. And it's really interesting how a lot of people don't make a big song and dance about the fact that it's leadership and I'm going to develop you, but it was a way of becoming and going that way. Is that how would you call it?
Yeah, I would say, yeah. And the interesting part there was that when he passed, I ended up getting promoted into his position. So it was almost a legacy. It was almost a legacy piece too, right? So it was one of those things he plucked me out of the boss world and brought me into the leadership world. I still love to tell that story.
It's amazing how a person can make a difference to us as individuals. And when I work with leaders as well, Dave, I asked that question. So if that's how he treated you, what would people say about you? What would people say about you as a leader, as their leader? What would they say behind closed doors or behind in the company as well? And it's really interesting because we always talk about other leaders and what leaders have done to us and how they work with us. But we also should ask the question about how others perceive us, because I think that's quite an important thing for us to look at.
Yeah. Which is another reason why I'll use this word values so much and with my coaching clients especially, is that people don't have to agree with what you value, completely agree with it to follow you, but they really need to agree you're a person of value.
Tell me more about your background. Is there anything else you want to share with us?
Yeah, sure. I spend most of my time in the technology world, and I think it's always exciting. We are always in the forefront of changes and all the new and exciting technology that have lots of promises. Some deliver really well, some pretty far-stretched. But I must say that I really enjoy riding ahead of the curve. And hence, that's why after almost 30 years with HP and various other technology companies, I really want to get in the position to continue to enjoy the wave of technology. So now I'm with the company called Lantern.ai, who's providing go-to-market as a service for software as a service business and AI startup. So I think this is really exciting, really continue to propel into the world of as a service, everything as a service. And I think that's probably the beginning of this wave, and we will see more to come. And on the other hand, I'm sitting on a few boards, right? On one hand, I'm serving with Singapore Red Cross as their board council member. I'm also the chairman of the international response. And over the last 2 years, we were just being so busy with all these COVID responses and all. But I would also say having this strategic view on the board really changed my perspective on many different things, right? We need to look longer term, but at the same time, we also need to be very surgical in our responses to situations that require us to make a difference. So I'm enjoying myself a lot, right? Especially connecting with the network that I built up over time, right?
Yeah.
People like yourself, in a matter of course, I can get some great advice or some great connect or tips to get things even better, faster, and more responsive. I think that's one thing we shouldn't underestimate, the network that we build up over time. Am I really excited? Yep.
That's awesome. I'm going to come back to you in relation to the networking, but there was something else you said before, which is around your background. So here you are at it was a Fortune 10 company, and then of course it's split up, being Hewlett-Packard. Then you've gone and left there. Now you've gone into a startup, but then you've also gone from an internal senior role within a large corporate, now also as a board member of a couple of boards as well. Tell me the transition between the corporate into the startup and then into the boards. What's that transition been like for you?
That's an interesting one. Yeah, I think you need to be conscious that you need change. You need to have a change in your mindset, your attitude about how things happen, and you need to change the world, but you need to change yourself first, right? You need to be adaptive. You need to be adjusting yourself to the different requirement. And every situation requires you to be different. So for me, I need to switch consciously to that mindset and no longer in a large company. I need to be as nimble, as flexible, and as adaptive to the environment that I needed to.
Yeah. So good. So we need to be adaptive. We change and nimble. And also our mindset. That's a huge one, right, around the mindset. And Dennis, you said earlier on before that, even so, you actually said about how you enjoy the ride ahead of the curve. When you say, and I think that's the words you used, when you say that, what do you do to stay ahead of the curve?
Yeah, that's a good one. So I would normally try to look at the big picture, where the entire trend is heading, where the situation is heading, then allow me to project myself forward so that I can be in a place where I can receive the ball, right? You can read the ball, where it's going, and you need to move to where the puck is heading instead of responding to yesterday's situation. So that's what I normally would aim to do. Sometimes I might miss it, but sometimes I will run ahead of the ball. But it's this practice and trying to anticipate, and you will get it right as you perfectly art. It's a combination of art and science by reading a situation.
That's a nice way of putting it, a combination of art and science. But you're right, it's actually reading the situation before it even happens and having that sort of hindsight, well, not hindsight, having that vision and that insight to be able to actually see it happening as well, and which is fantastic. Now, the other thing you mentioned, as I said, I'll come back to it, was networking. And as you said, I think that's probably one of the big things that has helped you be successful and other leaders as well. But a lot of leaders out there today aren't very good at networking. What would be one or two tips you might actually say to people that they should do in building a network? What are one or two things they can do?
To be honest, I'm not an extrovert. So for me, networking doesn't come naturally. But I do consciously find common interests and common topics that I could try a win relationship, right? And I believe in building a relationship for long term. So I'm not going to go in with the short-term gain for myself over the other party, but I would want to go in, understand what's their hot button, what would they need me to value add to them in this relationship. Because once I establish that, then typically I could move ourselves from business associate to partners, and then sometimes into friends. If the common interests go beyond just a business win solution, right? And into personal interest, I think that's where it will be that level that you can have a really sustainable network out there.
Yeah, fantastic. And I really like what you say there about building relationships. I think people tend to get hung up about that word networking. And it's not about networking. It's about building relationships for the future as well, as you said. And I think that's very good that we can do that. Looking for people's hot buttons and helping them. And yes, I think that's great. And when you said you're probably you're not an extrovert, you're an introvert. Come on, man. I've seen you had some fun together and good laughs and things like that. And I know that your hair at times have been spiky as well. What do you mean you're not an extrovert?
Yeah, those are my antennas to pick up the right signal. There's a bit about natural self, right? So if I'm in my downtime, I might be just reading a few books, magazines, watching some movies, or pick up some nice photography to learn more. I'm probably more in the mode of learning, but I want to learn in a quiet pace. And that's my natural self. But when I'm then out on almost like a mission, be it a business setting or in a personal setting where I need to connect, when I need to build up relationship for a long-term good, it could be a charitable mission, it could be a business mission. But then I switch on to that mode about wanting to build sustainable relationship and meaningful relationship. And I constantly ask myself, how could I value add to this party, to this person that I'm meeting? So that maybe it's quite strange to myself. That's why sometimes it becomes not that enjoyable. But sometimes when it's so much fun that you forget that you are in a mission too, right?
Tell us a little bit more. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your background?
Oh, sure. I was born in the Soviet Union. Talking about why I'm in leadership and change, you can imagine that Soviet Union as a region has gone through tremendous amount of disruption and change in the last 100 years. So I was born to a family of political dissidents. Most of my great-grandparents and grandparents I executed. And I grew up searching for a way to live in a world that felt a little bit more hopeful. That's my background.
Wow. Wow, what an amazing background. And so were you born in the US? Did you move to the US?
I was born in the Soviet Union, the part of the Soviet Union that is now called Kazakhstan. And most people don't know a few things about Kazakhstan. Number one, it's the 9th largest country in the world. So we have a lot of land and almost no people. Why do we have almost no people? Because about 90 years ago, in the late 1920s, early 1930s, the Soviet Union government created a genocide that murdered 40% of Kazakh people. So this is the history of my land. I came to America on a scholarship to study civic education, psychology, and management in 1998.
Excellent. And you've got a doctorate in organizational behavior, is that right?
Absolutely. That was an absolute gift. This was my professor group, a group of professors in college who pretty much kicked me. I was refusing to do a doctorate, and I wanted to go to New York City where all of my friends went after college, and they said, you will not be happy, so you will apply, and you will say no only when they say no. So I went on and did my doctorate very young, right after bachelor degree.
Wow. Brilliant. Excellent. And so what was the transition like for you coming to the US to live or going to the US to live? Or what was that transition like for you?
Everything you can imagine. I came here in 98. At that time, we had no emails. I called my parents once a month on a 5-minute prepaid card. And for the remaining of the month, they didn't know if I was alive or dead. The best guess was that if I'm dead, they will be informed. That's about it. I love the amazing quality of education. I got such a glorious education in terms of my college and then later my doctorate. I went to school in upstate New York, then I went to Case Western. There is no way I can ever repay the quality and the care that I got during my education. And that carried me through. I think the care of professors and community around me is what carried me through.
Yeah, isn't it wonderful when you get the right people around you to support you? It's amazing what you can go off and achieve and be, which is brilliant. And I think it's really important that we do network. But I think the key I'm going to say here with a caveat is that you have the right people around you. And I think that's really important.
I am with you. I think the combination makes magic that can never be explained with rational thought. Why did we blossom so much? This collection of kids who barely spoke any English, and we all have glorious careers around the world because we were at the right place at the right time with an amazing group of professors.
Yeah, and then how did you come together with those professors? In other words, how did that all happen? It's like magic. It's really amazing to see as well. So, Nadya, how did you get into leadership?
That was a story long before I left the Kazakhstan land. Right after the collapse of the Soviet Union. So you can picture this. Soviet Union collapsed without any prior warning. There was no referendum. There was no discussion. There was no vote. There was no warning. 3 people got drunk in the woods and signed dissolution documents. The president of our country was in flight trying to stop them at the time of this happening, and he was too late. So one day we wake up. We have no government, no police, no ministers, no healthcare, no nothing. My country was so taken by surprise that it took us almost 3 years to develop our own currency. So there was this absolute vacuum on the ground. And at that point, just a few years later, in 1992, I believe, an amazing organization was born called Association of Young Leaders. It was born in partnership with California Association of Student Councils, and the goal was to give basic leadership skills to young people in their late teens, early 20s. And imagine my surprise that after being trained at the Association of Young Leaders conferences and then becoming a facilitator and a coach, I come to do my doctorate and I learned that what we were teaching and using was actual science. I was just blown away. But we were introduced to Tuckman's theory of group development, for example, a lot of tools on strategic planning and many other things in leadership theory that I use to this day. So I got very lucky that in a very young age, I was introduced to some of the best leadership thinking in the world because of this vacuum, this opening that was left out of the collapse and the rebels of the Soviet Union.
So did you actually have a desire to be a leader? Where did that desire to get involved and learn about leadership? Where did that come from?
But I have a particular point of view on leadership. I
Right.
do not believe that you are a leader in a sense of a title or a noun. Leadership for me is a space you enter and exit many times a day.
Yeah.
I do leadership, or I enter the space called leadership 20 times a day, and then I exit. And it is a choice, a particular mode of activity or my particular way of operating around the world that comes as a cocktail with many other forms of operation and many other forms of behavior. So I felt like I need the skill set because many times during the day, I need that particular activity if I want to be successful.
I like it, how you enter into a space and you exit it as well as a leader. And maybe similar to the way I look at it as well as sometimes we have it's like baseball caps, right? You might be a coach, a leader, a mentor, and a trainer, possibly. And within a certain discussion or conversation, I might be changing those caps a lot, right? So I might be interested. But I like the way that you put it, that you can enter into that space and exit out as well, because there will be times you are the leader and there'll be other times where you're the follower, or you may be doing other things as well. And yeah, I really like that whole analogy that you just shared.
I love that. It comes from a nomadic culture. I think most Aboriginal societies around the world, and Kazakhs are nomads, that still to this day don't have their own alphabet. We used to borrow our Arabic, and currently we're using Cyrillics, but our own alphabet is oral because we never wrote things down. Nomads don't write things down. The traditional Aboriginal cultures all look at leadership as a circle, as a dynamic force that is larger than any human being. And you enter the circle and you exit the circle. You don't hold the power indefinitely. So you can find it in a lot of mythical traditions. You will find it in a lot of kind of processes and organizational structures of a typical council and a typical village. It's very circular, and it's very much a space type of metaphor.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Leadership is Changing with your host, Denis Gianoutsos. Each week, we and our guests provide information and insights through exploring leading change, inspiring executives and leaders to adapt and lead a bigger game in a fast-moving world.